From as early as 1896, films have attempted to portray spiritual, supernatural, or human evil to captivate and terrify audiences all over the world, giving moviegoers the choice to experience anxiety and excitement in a way that others might consciously avoid. A means to give players an escape from reality by transporting them to worlds where they can go on epic adventures, take on the role of nearly anything or anyone that they could possibly imagine, do the extraordinary as well as the mundane, solve complex puzzles and mysteries, and not just see or hear a story, but be an active participant in it. What would happen if the most alluring aspects of the horror film genre were incorporated into a video game to create a new experience, giving players something that the movie watcher lacks: control over the character's actions to survive the horror? A subgenre in gaming that, as its name implies, tasks the player with surviving macabre situations. For most, this subgenre is inextricably connected to Capcom's Resident Evil game series. From its birth, Resident Evil would go on to inspire the creation of more games within the same vein that explored the physical, psychological, paranormal, and even alien facets of fear, with players neck-deep in the action. Since its premiere on the Sony PlayStation in 1996, Resident Evil has transformed into a global franchise, making its way into several forms of media, such as comics, films, books, and more. Like the T-Virus, this series has spread to the gaming population and transformed its landscape. Though now Resident Evil is an extremely successful franchise, it might be shocking to learn that Capcom never expected it to be, were it not for the efforts of Shinji Mikami, his team, and Tokuro Fujiwara. The Resident Evil series would never have seen the light of day. So come and follow us through the long corridors, down the dark staircases, as we unlock the doors long overlooked, as we tell the story of the man, the game, and the others responsible for its creation. August 11th, 1965 was a day of historical significance in America. The Watts riots had begun in south central Los Angeles, California. Severe tensions between the police and citizens of South Central escalated and resulted in the largest and most costly urban rebellion of the civil rights era. After 6 days of looting, violence, and absolute chaos, cars as well as shops were destroyed by fire, and more than $40 million worth of property damage was inflicted on the commercial section of Watts County. Over 14,000 National Guard troops were mobilized in an effort to quell the violence and destruction. But across the Pacific Ocean, in Iwakuni, Yamaguchi, Japan, it was just another day. And on this day, Shinji Mikami was born. Growing up, Mikami led a seemingly normal and unremarkable life. Though he dreamed of someday becoming a Formula One race car driver, he went to school and lived in a modest home, to parents that made up the basic fabric of his and of his other classmates' lives. His father, however, was strict, if not abusive at times. Mikami would describe him as a violent person that hit him daily. In one particular and unforgettable incident, he recounted,
"I remember one night when I went to bed without doing my homework. He kicked me out of bed in the middle of the night and told me to go outside. So I did, in my pajamas without any shoes on, and he told me to stand in front of the car. Then he started chasing me around in the car, and he wound up having me run about 5 or 6 kilometers all the way to the seashore by our house. Once we hit the coast, he drove off without saying a word, so I had to walk home by myself in pajamas. If you think about it, if the police had seen this barefoot boy in pajamas being chased by a guy in a car, they would have arrested him on the spot, wouldn't they?"
Regardless of his often censorious relationship with his father, Mikami appreciated and respected him. He understood the hard work and sacrifices that his father had made to support his family, though Mikami knew this did not excuse his father's extreme disciplinary methods. During this time, as young Mikami was experiencing the stress of his home life and attending elementary school, Mikami discovered the story of Yatsuya Kaiden, and this became one of the most influential things that helped shape the course of his future. It is perhaps the most well-known ghost story in Japan, Yatsuya Kaiden started off as a kabuki play in 1825. Its original title was Tokaido Yatsuya Kaiden, or The Ghost of Yatsuya in Tokaido. Throughout its existence, the story has been altered and adapted multiple times in various forms of media. The overall story is one of love, betrayal, and supernatural revenge. This ghostly tale would serve as the foundation of Mikami's interest in the horror genre, which only grew as time went on, due in large part to Western films such as Dawn of the Dead, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Jaws, The Evil Dead, Alien, The Shining, and many other classics. During his adolescence, Mikami became a fan of professional wrestling and would indulge in the martial arts, practicing karate and kendo. As he entered adulthood, it was around this time that a friend of his who liked video games would use an ad for a pro wrestling game called Apo in order to lure Mikami to the arcade. It worked, and Mikami's love of video games was born. By the age of 20, his interest in gaming grew significantly. Mikami started playing video games much more regularly than he had before and embraced his new hobby with enthusiasm. Academically, Mikami was a good student, but he struggled with college entrance exams, failing them on 2 prior occasions. His third attempt would be successful, and he was accepted into Kyoto's Doshisha University. While in attendance, he studied merchandising, but after graduating, Mikami had seemingly resigned himself to pursuing a mundane job. At one point, he even considered becoming a bank teller. Fortunately, that never happened. Once students complete their courses, the universities in Japan provide many companies an opportunity to recruit new alums into their ranks through conferences and presentations. Mikami was invited to these presentations, and among all the employers he came across, Nintendo and Capcom seemed to interest him the most. He applied to both. Later, at the behest of a friend, Mikami found himself at another Capcom career recruitment event, held at the Hilton Hotel. Reflecting on the matter, Mikami figured even if he didn't get a job, he could at least get a free meal for attending. Mikami stated in a later interview, "Capcom's presentation appealed to me more than any of the other ones I attended. It's mysterious. During the screening process, I was turned down. Then a week later, out of the blue, they called to say I was hired. I have no idea why that happened." And with that, Shinji Mikami began his career at Capcom. 1990. Mikami started as a game planner on the Nintendo Game Boy's Capcom quiz Hatana no Daiboken, which purportedly took over 3 months to complete and would only see release in Japan. Mikami's arrival at Capcom also coincided with the company's growing recognition and critically acclaimed work on various Disney animated properties being adapted into games. So it was no surprise that Mikami's second assignment would be the lone task of designing 1991's Who Framed Roger Rabbit based on the feature film for the Game Boy. Mikami's next project would be something that he had a great interest in since childhood, a Formula One racing title for the Game Boy called Super Lap. It was around this time that Mikami developed a reputation for being very demanding and temperamental if a game's development didn't go according to plan. For Super Lap, Mikami set the bar higher than what his team could conceivably reach due to the limitations of the technology they were working with. After 8 months of development, the game was canceled and never saw release. Mikami would then go on to design Disney's Goof Troop, a puzzle game based on the popular cartoon series for the Super Nintendo. Soon after, he worked as a planner on his first big hit, Aladdin, based on Disney's animated movie for the SNES. It would go on to sell 1.7 million copies worldwide and garner praise from the video game media and players alike. Mikami's good work wouldn't go unnoticed, so in November of 1993, his boss, Tokuro Fujiwara, who had overseen Mikami's work on Aladdin, approached him about a new project that would significantly impact not only Mikami's career, but gaming as well. At the time, Fujiwara was the general manager of Capcom's consumer games division. Throughout his tenure in the company, Fujiwara had been involved in either the creation, planning, or development in many of Capcom's most iconic game franchises, including Ghosts and Goblins, Mega Man, Strider, Demon's Crest, Bionic Commando, Final Fight, Breath of Fire, and many others. but it was his work on 1989's Sweet Home for the Nintendo Famicom that would lay the foundation for things to come. Based on the Japanese horror film of the same name, Sweet Home is widely considered to be the first survival horror game before the subgenre was formally established. The game inspired many aspects of what would become survival horror, such as its gameplay elements, storytelling, and an emphasis on graphic depictions of horror and violence. The main objective of this game was to survive the haunted mansion of Lady Mamiya and all the grisly apparitions inside it. A party of 5 characters enter to take pictures of paintings for a documentary and become trapped. They must now work together to escape. This game reintroduces many familiar elements from classical RPGs, using a modern-day setting and everyday items, along with permanent character death, a non-linear game design which, along with its interactive environments, allowed for multiple solutions to objectives, a narrative told through the use of notes and diaries that are found, and choices that often brought severe consequences made Sweet Home an ambitious and unique experience that Fujiwara wanted to revisit and introduce to a new audience. The Sony PlayStation, which had not yet been announced to the general public, would be chosen as the game's platform, and Fujiwara would entrust his kohai, or junior, Shinji Mikami with bringing it to life. Mikami initially resisted being a part of the project, since he didn't like being scared, which was ironic given his love of horror films. In regards to Mikami's initial hesitance, Fujiwara recalled,
"If he'd answered that he never got scared, I couldn't have trusted him with the project. People who aren't afraid of anything don't understand what's frightening. In my view, you can't make a horror game if you don't have any fear."
Eventually, Mikami relented, realizing that his ability to be scared would be pivotal in creating a frightening experience for the player, and the prospect of creating a game similar to Sweet Home, a game that Mikami considered to be a masterpiece, was appealing. So he accepted the job as director. Psycho, the name Mikami chose for the project, shared some similarities with its predecessor Sweet Home. Originally designed as a first-person 3D shooter that took place in a haunted mansion where players would battle ghosts. To Mikami, ghosts were more frightening than anything else. However, he dropped the idea of battling evil spirits since he felt it would not provide the same level of excitement that fighting a physical threat would. Upon exploring his ideas further, Mikami decided on a monster that is similar to humans and remembered George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, so zombies as enemies were the perfect fit. And unlike the protagonists of the film, players through their skill and technique can not only survive an encounter against them, but fight back. It was at this moment Mikami realized the concept for Biohazard. Along with many other classic horror films, such as The Shining and Romero's Of the Dead movies, Mikami would take the best aspects of these films and contrast them with the worst of Lucio Fulci's Zombie, a movie he greatly disliked.
I really wanted to make a game that was as scary as a horror film. Not ghosts or anything stupid like that, but with real monsters that were out to get you. You know, like in Jaws or Alien, with those terrifying creatures that scared the living daylights out of you. Sometimes you watch a horror film and you think, what would I do in that situation? So the initial idea was to put players in the shoes of the main character so they could feel the same fear and let the character carry out their actions. I wanted to create a new kind of horror entertainment, one that was impossible to achieve in movie format. Shinji Mikami.
For the first 6 months, the development of Biohazard was a solo effort, but eventually Mikami's team would grow to include the likes of Hideki Kamiya, Hiroki Kato, Kenichi Awao, Yasuhiro Ampo, Koji Oda, Ippo Yamada, Kazuhiro Aoyama, Hiroyuki Kobayashi, Katsutoshi Karatsuma, and Jun Takeuchi. Biohazard took on a more sci-fi role, as opposed to its supernatural beginnings. Its main characters were a specially trained team with cybernetic implants that initially consisted of Beam Mercurio, who would later become Chris, Jill, Dewey the comical relief, and the imposing Gelzer. Their mission was simple: investigate and battle through a mansion filled with zombies and monstrosities created by a mad scientist. This story and cast, however, would not play out as a first-person shooter. The hardware limitations of the PlayStation could not produce the vision Mikami and his team shared in a way that met their standards. In search of a solution, Mikami learned about a game called Alone in the Dark. This game's third-person perspective and camera style gave him the answer to the PlayStation's technical limitations. Though Mikami was hesitant to use fixed camera angles since he felt it would take away from the experience, he took a chance on this design choice, which provided the ability to use pre-rendered backgrounds. Using this rendering method, the backgrounds created a greater amount of detail than what was feasible in the original first-person design, and would be well within the system's capabilities, providing both the depth and visuals that satisfied Mikami and his team. With a third-person perspective in place, Mikami and his team intended to make the game cooperative, with the player having the ability to access a menu to command their partner. This would have allowed Chris and Jill to work as a team throughout the game. Later on, Mikami explained that the dev team could not get the co-op feature to work well enough to warrant its inclusion. The ability to switch weapons in real time was also possible in early prototypes, but was removed later on in development without explanation.
We had originally attempted to have everything appear in full polygons. However, it became very clear early on that this wouldn't be possible given the limitation of the hardware at the time. Mikami's priority was making sure the zombies' visuals conveyed a sense of fear, so the decision was made to use polygons for them. The backgrounds were then swapped out to pre-rendered visuals, and this was when we decided to use the static camera as well. Yasuhiro Ampo.
Despite new developments in the Biohazard project, Capcom was not impressed, and their initial confidence in Biohazard soon turned to doubt. Several changes had already been made to the game, and the difficulties surrounding its production and Mikami's standard of perfection led to several team members resigning from the project. Capcom was especially displeased with Mikami's lack of initiative to work on a better script for the game. Mikami insisted to primarily focus his efforts on gameplay. Capcom's concern over Biohazard's poor script led them to assign Kenichi Iwao to undertake the responsibility of writing the game scenario, fleshing out its world and people within it. Iwao would also redesign, replace, and add new characters, changing the sci-fi inspired designs to more realistic ones that players could better identify with.
I joined the project in mid-development. Originally, there were no humans in the game, just cyborgs. It was supposed to be a horror game, still, by having these Terminator-style characters. It just wasn't very scary at all. I decided to change up the characters. The initial draft had a mad scientist-like doctor who was doing freakish experiments. I ended up redesigning the characters who would wind up having defining roles in the game, like Chris, Jill, and Wesker, as well as creating the Umbrella Corporation as an enemy, and concepts like the T-Virus. I also wrote all the diary entries and files you find throughout the game. Kenichi Iwao.
Even though work on the game continued, unbeknownst to Mikami, Capcom gave serious consideration to canceling it altogether, after being advised by an American consulting firm that Capcom would be better off cutting their losses on Biohazard. Behind the scenes, Fujiwara was having none of it, and convinced his superiors to allow Biohazard's completion, assuring them that despite their reservations, the game would be a success. To further add to the cinematic feel of the game, the opening and ending sequences of Biohazard would be shot in live action, with American and Australian actors, at the direction of Mitsuhisa Hasoki, but the game's voice acting would be left to Mikami and entirely different casts, one of which was Japanese. But after failing to live up to Mikami's expectations, the Japanese language track would be cut, leaving all of Biohazard's voice-recorded dialogue exclusively in English.
Is this?
That's right. This is the ultimate life form. Tyrant. Chris? Stop it.
With the WoW's new story in place to complement its gameplay, Biohazard's production continued, and on September 13th, 1995, at Japan's Shueisha V-Jump V Festival, Mikami and his team showed off the game at its current stage of development, giving the general public and gaming media a working proof of concept. Months later, on December 23, 1995, Capcom held their own press conference to announce Biohazard's imminent arrival to the rest of the world. Unfortunately, very few journalists showed up, and the game's announcement garnered little interest. The lackluster response only served to diminish Capcom's faith in Biohazard even more. But Tokuro Fujiwara remained unfazed and confident that the game would easily sell 200,000 copies. The phrase survival horror would be coined by Capcom to market the game, And thus, the subgenre that had already existed for some years now had its name. On March 22nd, 1996, Biohazard released on the Sony PlayStation in Japan. And then 8 days later, March 30th in North America, though with some differences, specifically in the game's live-action intro and in-game cutscenes, a significant amount of which that were considered to be too violent, graphic, out of place, or potentially controversial would be edited out. The game's difficulty would also be increased, and arguably its most significant change would be its renaming to Resident Evil. This was due in part to the word Biohazard already being used as the name of a previously released game as well as the name of a hardcore punk rock band. The name Resident Evil and all of its changes would also carry over to the UK and European releases 5 months later on August 1st. When the increasing number of reports of local people either going missing or dying violently start to surface in Raccoon City, the police department decides to send in their elite unit, Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or STARS, to investigate an area in the Arklay Mountains that is believed to be the place of origin for all the recent horrible things that have occurred. They send their Bravo team in first, but lose contact with them and soon after dispatch their Alpha team, consisting of Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Joseph Frost, Brad Vickers, and their captain, Albert Wesker. Upon arriving at their destination, they find the Bravo team's helicopter in shambles, with no member of Bravo team in sight. All of a sudden, they are attacked by what appears to be a pack of mutilated dogs. Their teammate, Joseph, is killed. As they fend off the monstrous mutts, the remaining STARS members make a hasty retreat to a nearby mansion. But little do they know that inside the mansion lies even more danger, in the form of zombies and other horde creatures. Now Chris, Jill, Barry, Wesker, along with Bravo team's Rebecca Chambers, must uncover the mystery of what exactly took place in this mansion, what the Tyrant virus is, who is responsible for it, and simultaneously try to survive the unspeakable evils within. To the surprise of Mikami and Capcom, Resident Evil was a huge hit, but to Fujiwara, it was like a prophecy had been fulfilled.
No one, not even the development team, had high expectations for the game. Certain managers at Capcom wanted to cancel the game, and that's what nearly happened. However, I really pushed them to see production through to the end. I myself personally had a lot of faith in the game. Tokuro Fujiwara.
Becoming the first PlayStation game to sell over 1 million copies after its release, Resident Evil would sell roughly 2.75 million copies worldwide before the end of its initial run, while garnering praise from critics and players alike for its graphics, sound, and gameplay. Among the noteworthy reviews, Famitsu magazine gave the game an overall score of 38 out of 40. GameSpot awarded the game an 8.2 out of 10, commenting, "It's one of the best buys for the PlayStation and one of those rare games that's almost as entertaining to watch as it is to play." Resident Evil also helped to spotlight the Sony PlayStation drastically as the premier console to own. Resident Evil's impact, though unexpected, was very beneficial to the gaming industry and popular culture. There was now seemingly a renewed interest in seeing zombies in other forms of media, and survival horror as a subgenre in gaming had now officially become established and viable in the marketplace. So naturally, Capcom wanted to capitalize on Resident Evil's unprecedented success, and a sequel seemed to be a foregone conclusion, even though it was never conceptualized to be a series. Mikami would be responsible for overseeing the entire project this time around, as his role would be changed to that of producer, and Hideki Kamiya would be entrusted by Mikami to take over the directing responsibilities. Fujiwara would leave Capcom months after Resident Evil's release to start his own company, but he was proud to leave Capcom and his protege with such a massive hit as a parting gift. For Mikami and his team, the second entry of Resident Evil was a great opportunity to not only improve on the formula of the previous game, but a new chance to innovate. This new opportunity, however, would not come without its own set of challenges. It would see the team through one of the most difficult production cycles in the series' history.